Are you ready for a dose of Harris doomerism? Sure. Michael from Pennsylvania. Hit my line. What's happening?
Well, you know, I think I'm in the dissenting seat for this community, and for the people who've been on here before.
Not
But
really. I think
Harris,
there's a lot of people in my community that think like
Okay.
Trump is definitely a lock. I would say more people probably in this community think Trump is a lock than even myself. I have brought forward people to make a convincing case as to why Kamala Harris still has a shot. I still think there is a likelihood that Kamala Harris will win, but that likelihood is so fucking small now that it's a massive toss up. Like I'm not talking about like the way that the media has covered this issue. I just wanted to hear like the most doomer analysis from you as someone who is in Pennsylvania, who has worked in Pennsylvania local politics. Like I think I value your analysis, especially on that front. And, I have brought forward a broad variety of different opinions on the matter, but I want to hear what your argument is as to why Kamala Harris is going to get fucking absolutely cooked.
Well, the first thing that I would say is it's a combination of a lot of factors. Is like one of the like theories that I've been pushing for like most of my political career is that like all politics is national now. Like our local politics is becoming less and less and less relevant, and states are starting to look more like each other, especially those that are close to them. And the thing about Pennsylvania is, and this is also similar in Nevada, where basically what we're seeing so far, and I think early voting is like the realm of charlatans, like the people that talk about early voting and like, oh, we know this is going to happen because of this. You don't really know what the contents of the vote are. At the most, you have like registration and whatnot. But one thing we can look at is people of a certain registration and what their propensity to vote is, and which group of people have been showing up at higher rates than others. And the reason why I'm very doomer on Harris is we've seen like a lot of like evidence is that the turnout among low propensity Democrats is way down, and the turnout among low propensity Republicans is up in a similar to like 2020, except we don't have the COVID mail-in ballot like a turnout boost. So that we're seeing a differential turnout for the Republican leaners are higher than the Democratic leaners. This is very true in like Nevada. I think Republicans have an outright turnout advantage, which they did not have in 2020.
Yeah.
Like they're up by a lot. In Pennsylvania, I think we have like the Democrats up by like around 300,000 net, and they need to be at least 500,000 like to win statewide. So she's way behind like where she needs to be. And then also like with Pennsylvania registration, there's been a continual like shift of people from Democrat to Republican, like a significant number more. I think it's like 80,000 more people registered Republican than Democrat over the last year. It might even be more. I'd have to look it up again. But that's kind of my main thrust is like, and it kind of tracks with my own vibes, which is why I kind of lend it a little bit of credence, which is it's 2 weeks before the election. What am I doing? Like, what is the internet political discussion? It's not people like all unifying around Harris like it was in 2020. I don't know about I don't know if you guys remember back then, but like my community and your community, we were all kind of like pushing for Biden. Like we were saying,
no, I voted for Joseph Robin and Brandon.
And we were like, yeah, vote for him. We got to get Trump out of there. And we were laughing over Trump getting sick from COVID a week before the election and being like, look at this idiot. When he did that stupid mask ripoff and he looked really weak. And everybody was like, he had to get helicoptered to, just the whole vibe was a lot different than now, which is we're engaged in infighting. Like the left of the party is under attack. It's a vote shaming thing. It's worse than 2016. There's a lot of young people that are not seeing anything like about Gaza to give them any hope. As far as like she's campaigning with the Cheneys, the progressive wing has been completely abandoned. I think you saw that Nation article from the interns at the Nation.
Yeah.
I don't think that is just a bubble. I think that is a sense that's like out there that,
so
don't vote for her because of the genocide.
Are you ready for this? Like, I think that, not to get all Nate Cohn over here, but I think that if like what I'm looking at right now is what the Democratic Party has very openly communicated. They're saying they have a pathway to victory that does not revolve around people who care about American foreign policy, people who care about Israel and Gaza, and young voters that they are relying on. They believe that those are firmly planted, that like there is going to be enough turnout from the youth vote that makes up for, the Philadelphia, like there's going to be enough black and brown and young Philadelphians that are voting in urban areas. And then that the real problem here is to just like decouple former Republicans or never Trump Republicans away from Donald Trump and just get them to go out and vote. It's very clear that we both agree that that's their strategy, right? Like that's precisely what they're doing. They are gambling with their regular constituencies and their propensity to turn out because they are taking it for granted and they are hyper focusing on a couple key targeted swing districts, a couple key suburbs, basically, where there are college educated white voters who have either, logged themselves as independents and have fucking voted for Donald Trump twice or at least once. And they are trying to get those guys to come out and vote for the Democratic Party. Now,
I just think that has absolutely no chance of working because, like, I think a lot of people take large swaths of the electorate for granted, and that's not how people operate. I have this. This is something I showed before, but I just popping it on my camera real quick.
Yeah.
But basically, tell me how interested you are in this election using scale 1 to 10. This is the lowest it's been for black voters and young voters, like going back to 2004.
Oh no, I remember looking at this data as well. Yes, this is very, very important. I totally agree with you.
Disastrous for the Democrats. Like, there's really no way to make that up with like swinging somebody who's a like suburban voter. And there's been $200 million spent in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so
that's this election cycle, and the numbers are bad. Like they're not. She's like she's well behind like previous Democratic candidates at this point in the race.
So that's the real problem here that I have been screaming about for months at this point is that like obviously the message that you are presenting is unsuccessful if you've dumped $200 million into communicating that message in every fucking ad possible and the polls have not even shifted, right? Or worse, shifted in Trump's favor. So clearly the message isn't working. Now, of course, they're too fucking late at this point. It's too late for them to just like all of a sudden communicate a very different message. And I think that like ultimately it's leaving it on it's a coin toss. Like it's leaving it up to a leading it up to a very dangerous gamble that like Philadelphia urban voters are going to turn out no matter what because they're worried about Roe v. Wade. They're worried about like Trump being a fascist, and they're going to do the lesser evil voting. They're going to do the harm reduction voting in enough numbers that they can fucking cling on to a couple of these suburban voters. Which, by the way, polls have shown that method is unsuccessful. That's the craziest part about this. I guess like in general polls, it shows that Kamala Harris is leading. Or is leading on Biden in terms of like white college educated voters. I have seen that. Like, she has maintained a strong presence in white college educated voters. It just matters. It's entirely dependent on where those white college educated voters are. If they're not in Pennsylvania, she's fucking cooked. Because
I think the thing for me is like, first of all, she hasn't given people a reason to believe she should be trusted with the presidency. Like at the end of the day, they reject Joe Biden, and her mission should have been show a vision for the country that would have been different than Joe Biden, a change election. And the reason why that was necessary is there was a Franklin and Marshall poll that just came out. I can link it to you if you want. But basically it goes through all this stuff. This is in Pennsylvania, and it's disastrous. It's fucking disastrous. Like
is it the legislative session? Shapiro insults protesters? No.
Here, I linked it to you. I linked it in chat.
No, link it in the Discord chat.
Oh yeah, that's old as fuck.
Yeah.
Here, I'll link it to you.
Oh, I got it. I found it. Okay.
Yeah.
Dear readers, okay.
If you scroll down, and the thing that really shocks me is the last time Pennsylvania residents thought their finances had been better than 1 year ago was October 2020.
Yeah, I see that. So
basically, for the entire time Biden has been president, people have been saying, no, my finances are worse off than a year ago. And like that, you can't ignore that. And like Kamala Harris did. And she just basically said, I wouldn't have done anything different than Biden. And that's the message people got. And as that's the message has gotten out, her momentum ended. It stalled completely.
Do you think, and this is crazy because like voters originally said that they weren't going to punish Kamala with Biden's economy.
She hugged him.
She had a blank slate when the swap out first occurred, which was crazy. It was like, I remember looking at polls being like, that's what a gift. What a gift to the Kamala Harris campaign.
This is something like when she first dropped out, I know you and I were like completely open to her. And I feel like that was a sign, we were representative in our communities of like the larger youth progressive wing of the parties where we were like, okay. And then when Walz was picked, we were like, okay. And like we were all chomping at the bit, ready to, jump on, become K-hivers. And the reality is, she went into the DNC. She made that disastrous right-wing speech. Ezra Klein of the New York Times, he did an analysis of it, and he said it was the most right-wing Democratic nomination speech he'd ever heard.
Yeah,
and it was
yeah.
And that's when the momentum stopped, and all the momentum she was seeing, all the movement in the polls that got her ahead of Trump was young people, was progressives coming home, was and a lot of people think of this like ideology in a totally wrong way. They think of like if somebody says they're moderate, it means they're a neoliberal centrist. And that's not what it is. It's more of a statement of your own like persona or your own like feelings about like time
and time again ballot measures. Time and time again, ballot measures have consistently proven that the most popular thing in the heartland, in the Midwest, in the Sun Belt, no matter where you go, is a lifeless, faceless, progressive ballot measure not associated with a Democrat directly. Americans love voting for instituting full-blown communism in the form of a progressive ballot measure, but fucking despise the Democrats or despise the Republicans as well, depending on where you're looking at. So, yes, the idea that like the average independent moderate who fancies themselves to be in directly the center of all of these issues is a silly one. And ironically enough, that's why I was excited about the Tim Walz prospect, because I thought that would actually force the Democratic Party's hand into putting forward or at least defending a progressive message. Because right. Tim Walz, with a one-person majority in the state Senate in Minnesota, actually signed into law many of these measures that were considered radical by the Republican Party and maybe even radical by some in the Democratic coalition.
Well, here's the thing that's really interesting about that is notice how none of the attacks on Tim Walz were about the policies he passed in Minnesota.
Yeah. It was about fucking how he has a fake dog or how he abuses his son or all this shit. Exactly. They originally laughed and were like, oh, what a stupid mistake that they went with radical Tim Walz. He's a communist. And none of that shit actually worked even a little bit. But the problem is the Democrats actually fucking moved away from that. And it's very frustrating, especially when you have one of your most popular policies in a sea of boring neoliberal bullshit be that you are going to tackle price gougers at the federal level with pre-existing law that already is out there.
Has is the most popular thing.
Yes, and it's very frustrating that they are not. It's very frustrating that they're not fucking. They didn't push that hard enough. Even though Donald Trump kept saying that's like Venezuela. And the only thing that happened to that policy was that it grew in popularity in that process. It literally became more popular despite the New York Times op-eds about fucking how, this is impossible to implement and Kamala is just doing this or Republicans consistently attacking it. Yeah, the moderate voters are all over the ideological map. You want to explain this to people?
So basically, I popped up from my camera. Basically,
go
this
ahead.
is a
I'm gonna go
study
pee while
from
you explain this. I know I've heard this a million times, but let's hear it.
This is a study from a few years ago, but it still holds true overwhelmingly. Like, so this is a basically a political, compass with tilted on the edge. So like the top and the left squares are like the left wing economics positions, and then being more pro immigration is the bottom and the left. Okay. So what you'll see, and these are people who call themselves moderates, and they were all given an ideological test. And one of the things you'll find really interesting about here is the overwhelming majority of people who consider themselves moderate are very left wing. And then the 2/3 to like 70% of people are left wing economically. Almost no one is a libertarian who considers themselves. So like libertarian square is the bottom square. There's almost no one there. And actually, there are some people who call themselves moderate who are extremely right wing, but it's very rare. So basically, when you're running on, when you see people saying like, oh, a lot of people are moderate, but that actually that's a label that's not connected to ideology. It's not like a lot of people are Joe Manchin. That's just not the case. And so that we've known this for a very, very long time, that self-described ideology doesn't describe what people support. And we can have real world tests of this. Like, for example, in Florida, over 60% of people voted to restore felon voting rights. Over 60% of people voted for a $15 minimum wage. At the same time, Donald Trump was winning by like 8 points. They were getting 60% for the $50. So people are not voting for these candidates as ideological like decisions. It's a lot different than that. And so when Kamala Harris goes to the right on these issues, what she's actually doing is not really winning over a population that exists. The people that are like, I love Liz Cheney, are not real. The people that love Liz Cheney are actually liberals who appreciate her shitting on Trump.
Yes.
So these are anti-Trump liberals, and they see a Republican spitting in Trump's face, and they like that. It's not like a moderate Republican who loves Liz Cheney.
She does not have. I mean, Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is the greatest example of this. Nikki Haley is the perfect example of this. Nikki Haley ran against Donald Trump. Nikki Haley said, whoever swaps their candidate first wins this election. Okay, but when it was Biden versus Trump, Nikki Haley literally is pro-Trump. She's voting for Trump. Nikki Haley voters are also voting for Trump. A lot of Nikki Haley voters in open primaries were actually Democrats who also either registered for the Republican Party to vote for Nikki Haley, or are also, going to end up, if they were Republicans, are going to end up voting for Donald Trump. Going after this Nikki Haley constituency is so fucking stupid. And that's precisely what the Democratic Party has done. Now, here's the other side of the equation. And this is why I think that Trump's chances are not great, regardless. Trump, what would you say to the argument that like Trump is maxed out on support? Would you agree with that assessment? That he is like...
No, probably not. Just because like we've seen him significantly get more popular in kind of a nostalgic way. Because like if you look at, I would say that like he does have kind of a ceiling near 50%, but it is high enough that he can win. So you know what I mean? Like and if you look at his like approval rating, like his favorability has improved significantly from 2016.
Yeah, that's
true. He's actually in the most favorable he's ever been. People think of his presidency as relatively more successful than Biden's. And, they don't really hold the COVID thing against him. Like, you know what I mean? And I don't think people really hold COVID against Biden either. They just hold the inflation against Biden. And whereas with Trump, they think of like the pre-inflation, low interest rate growth period, right?
Mike is
that's
right.
Just the way
Trump,
it is.
Mike is right.
That's the way it is.
Trump has never been this popular in any of the elections that he has run. This is the most popular he has been at this stage in the election. That is objectively correct. Okay.
Now he's not he's not popular. Like he's still net negative.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. This is the most popular he has ever been while running in an election. Okay. Elections that he's won, election that he lost, doesn't matter. This is the most popular he has ever been. In terms of the electoral support, I believe this is the highest he has had as well in the polls.
Yeah.
Like,
no, he's never been better in the polls.
Yes.
In the 3 elections, like the polls right now, Trump has never been better. Never.
Yes. So
like for me, that's the kind of thing that I look at where I do like a sanity check. Like, okay, is it possible that the polls are wrong and that Harris is like could win? The answer is yes. I think whenever you're looking at polls from a scientific perspective, you should look at that and recognize they have a margin of error and it's possible. And then when we start to think about like, okay, historically, why did the polls get it wrong? Why were they underestimating Trump in both 2016 and 2020? And the answer is a certain type of low propensity Republican voter turning out and being hard to poll. And the question I keep asking myself is, does it seem like with the evidence available that those people are showing up again? And does Kamala Harris have a commensurate like rise in low propensity Democrat voters?
Hold on. Or where they're showing up. That's important too. I think that like my argument or my vibe overall on this is that there is a very high likelihood that Trump can win. I still think Kamala Harris is like I put her
she's an underdog at this point.
I put Kamala Harris like marginally in a better shot than Donald Trump, because I do think that the polls, at least pollsters from what I have seen, have slammed at least 2 points in Trump's favor in an effort not to repeat the mistakes of 2016. And even Trump overperformed the polls in 2020 as well, not to the same degree, but like he obviously overperformed polls in 2016. And he also overperformed the polls in 2020 as well.
He actually
so this time I think pollsters are like literally fucking slamming 2 points no matter what.
It's interesting you say that. It's interesting you say that because like he did overperform the polls more in 2020 than he did in 2016. He was just further behind Biden in the polls. So like the polls had Biden up like 8. He ends up winning by 3. Well, that's a 5-point error, but he was so far ahead in the polls that he still won, right? Whereas in 2016, Hillary was up, 3 or 4 in the polls, and then she ends up losing the close states. So she loses, and the polls were wrong like by 2 points, right? So the 2 points were more relevant because of where they were, like how the numbers were looking. But 2020 was actually worse. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, have the pollsters figured out how to poll the electorate that supports Donald Trump in general elections correctly? And I don't think we can know that until the actual election happens, which is why I have if I thought that they had done that, then I would say the polls are accurate. But the reason I think, if you're betting, to me, I think that it's much more likely that they got it wrong again, because it's very hard to like get these people.
Yeah, no, it's notoriously difficult, which is why I think they're just straight slamming 2 extra points. That's what I'm saying.
I don't see any evidence that they're just doing that shy Trump adjustment. Like, so it's funny you mentioned this, because back in 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn was running for the first time as the nominee for Labor in a general election, and the polls were all very much in favor of the Tories because they had this shy Tory weighting on it. And I was one of those people that looked into it and said, oh no, I think Corbyn's going to massively overperform. And he ended up he almost won the election outright. But there was a massive polling error against the Tories in 2015 because of that shy Tory weighting that was being applied. I don't think I see any shy Republican weighting being applied.
No, I don't think it's shy Republicans. I don't think it's a matter of shy Republicans. I think it's a matter of like it not being able to predict low and mid propensity voters accurately. So they're just like throwing that on the board. Like they're just weighing it in that direction so that they don't come short again. That's what I think is going on, because I don't think no Trump supporter is shy at this point. Okay, there's no.
That's what I.
Yeah, they're loud as fuck. Okay, they love Donald Trump. They love saying they love Donald Trump. They're calling him daddy. They're fucking insane over there. I don't think it's the shy.
Saying spank me. Yeah. I know.
Yeah, I don't think it's the shy Trump voters necessarily. I think it's more so like how many of the fucking crackhead constituency that like. How many of the podcasters, like podcast watchers, divorced dads galore, are actually going to turn out on election day and go out and vote because they're legitimately fucking, they're They think Kamala Harris is a Marxist or whatever the fuck they believe.
Well, I mean, I think the place to look, like, you know about the Nevada, you know, like Ralston, right?
Yeah. That's
So
not looking good for the Democrats.
He's been covering it pretty. So this is not Pennsylvania, so I don't know. I mean, I lived in Nevada for a bit, but I don't know it as well as Pennsylvania. But what I understand is like they're massively underperforming like ever before. Like in the early voting, like the Democrats are actually less turning out in early vote, and that's like never before happened because of the Reid machine. And one of the things that was really interesting is a GOP operative, and this is quoting from Ralston, Jeremy Hughes said that the problem for Democrats comes up when we look at the low propensity voters. GOP 204 voters. So when you say somebody's 204, you're talking about the last general elections, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a 204, you're a low propensity voter. Means you've missed two of the last 4 general elections. We consider that low propensity. Anybody below 3 of 4 is low propensity voter, right? So of the 2 of 4 voters, they have 25.3% turnout among GOP. Of Dem 204, it's 20.9% turnout so far. So
I mean, but that tracks. That literally is like represented in the national data as well. That's like the assessment is that
that means Harris loses.
Yeah,
that would be terrible.
So that is precisely the reason why I've been like, that is what I foresee as like possibly being Kamala Harris's demise, is that low and mid propensity voters do turn out specifically in the states that Kamala Harris needs to win. And Kamala Harris actually hemorrhages enough of her base, like the reliable votes that she normally gets from urban areas, younger voters, black and brown voters, and hyper focuses far too much on the Republicans in the suburbs, which have proven to be ineffective with all of the communications she's put out so far, and it doesn't carry her across the finish line. Like I'm on that. I understand that completely. I've been screaming about it for months. I just I still think that I still think that there is a pathway to victory.
I mean, she could win, but like, you know, as I said, because polls can always be wrong. You know, you could have a polling error against her. I have a theory of the case for her if you want to hear it later, but I'm not very confident in it. And the reason why is because like one of the things that was really interesting in this data that I saw is that the GOP is winning among new voters and voters who have never voted before. Like of people that are registered Republican but who have never voted before, they have 17.8% turnout for the GOP right now in the early vote, and among Dem voters, it's 13.9%. So that's like so like people that are newly registered are turning out at a much higher rate if they register as a Republican. Thus far, you know, this is early voting. We got to wait till all the way to election day. I do think that there tends to be an advantage of non-college educated voters the closer you get turning up, which I think Nevada, like I always thought Nevada would probably be held by the Democrats, but because they have such a weak Senate candidate, but I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to doom too hard. I'm concerned that, though, this might actually be like a Trump popular vote win just based on these numbers that we're seeing. And that would be absolutely cooked. And I think the evidence is strong enough there to be concerned about that.
You don't think that there's a Trump popular vote victory where he still loses the Electoral College, though?
That would only happen if she managed to hold Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And I think any election path that requires Michigan to be held by Harris is very suspect. I think people really are underestimating the damage that has been done by Gaza because they don't want to deal with it until it actually happens. They're like in denial about it. They're like, no, they won't vote for the Muslim ban guy. And they just kind of turn off their brain and they don't look into the data at all. And if you look at I think Biden won by, how much did he win Michigan by, chat? I was going to say 80,000, but I don't remember.
I think it was 100,000.
Okay, 100,000. Like there are, you know, like what, 300,000 Arabs and Muslim voters in Michigan? Like,
Yeah, and I think they voted for Biden by like
70%.
Yeah, 70.
Yeah. So that's like that, and that's the entire gap. I mean, I guess it's possible. I mean, the path would be that she does move the numbers among white voters closer to, like, she does even better than Biden does with white voters overall. I find that hard to believe. I legitimately find that like almost unbelievable. The idea that Joe Biden would do worse with white voters than Harris would do.
I think that the math comes down to white women. Like, I think that's what it comes down to. Like, are white women finally not going to vote for Trump as the majority? And I don't know where that is right now. But I think if Kamala Harris secures white women as the majority voting bloc, then she has a chance of winning the election. The problem, however, is that when you look at Arizona polling, where abortion is on the ballot, when you look at Florida polling, where abortion is also on the ballot, well, I guess Florida is a unique case in and of itself.
Florida is like, I think the Republicans are up 10 in the early vote right now.
Yeah, Florida doesn't like, make any sense. It doesn't matter, now. but like
that's crazy.
In midterms, and in other special elections, like obviously abortion being on the ballot has greatly favored the Democratic Party in terms of turnout. In the general election, it's a little bit different than midterms. It's a little bit different than it's obviously very different than like special elections. I think that like not Florida, but Arizona as an example is more important to see if like this kind of additional turnout specifically on abortion, does that allow Kamala Harris a benefit, an electoral boost? And I think that for a lot of white women in red states, I do not know if they will be able to shake off white supremacy as being their primary motivator here, where they can very selfishly go, yeah, I want to protect abortion, and also I'm not going to punish the guy who took it away from me and my daughters, and then turn around and still vote for Donald Trump gladly.
I feel like one of the problems that we have is that the Democratic Party hasn't like drawn those lines, like, because they want to do this thing where they like kiss Republican ass, but they don't want to, like 95% of Republicans are going to vote for Trump. And Democrats don't deal with that, like that problem. Like they don't go to the voters and say the Republicans are Trump supporters, and Trump supporters are wrong. They're scared to say that. Yeah. Whereas on the other side, the Republicans are like, these are criminals over there. All Democrats should go to hell, and that creates a certain like distance from the consequences of the Republican Party's policies. She doesn't want to attack the Supreme Court. Like, remember, she was on that town hall and she was asked about the Supreme Court getting expanded, and she said we should study it. Well,
oh my God. Oh, that was so bad.
They already studied it. Biden did an executive order in 2001. They published a report, like, I think it was even early this year, about studying the Supreme Court reform. And they came up with the idea of like term limits or something. And so she's basically just running on studying it again.
Yeah, no, she has concepts of a plan. That's her concepts of a plan shit. Like Kamala Harris is like she always does this. She used to do this in 2019. We used to make fun of it, where she would be like, we're going to begin to start thinking about the steps that we must take in the future as a prospect arises. It's like, what the fuck are you saying? Like, that's not an answer. You're just dancing around the fucking issue.
And I think the reason why it's bad is a number of things. First of all, it keeps the Republican Party like free and clear from the consequences of their policies, like on abortion, overturning abortion. The second thing is it doesn't give Democrats, it doesn't like force Democratic politicians to take public positions on court reform. So even if she does win and we do get a trifecta, we're not getting court reform because they didn't prepare the party for it. They didn't make it, they didn't run on it. So they're not going to suddenly like come and do this big radical reformation, so it's not possible to reform it. And then the Democratic base voters are not equipped with the knowledge of knowing who's to blame. So regular people aren't going to figure that out either. So you're kind of like expecting people to be like super educated about, who's to blame for who in 30 years of Supreme Court precedent in history, but also not blame Harris for not having a clear plan. So people are supposed to be educated, not want a plan to fix it, but then ignore the fact that there's no plan. It is an incoherence. and this is a problem with Harris, is she wasn't challenged in a primary. She wasn't forced to like come out and make promises and give concessions to various groups to win a primary election that are in the Democratic Party and kind of shore up her base. Yeah. And so she's kind of just like assumed the base is there, and now she's going to the right, and there's a big problems with the base. And the turnout and the vibe is down because of, the genocide is clearly one. She said fuck you to everybody to the left of Attila Hun. She's holding hands with Dick Cheney. And like, it's not that these people are going to vote for Trump. They're just not going to show up.
Yeah, no, that's my
theory of the case.
No, okay. So we're in agreement there. I'm like, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I don't even think she's done enough fear mongering against Donald Trump, which is kind of crazy to say. Like, I don't think that she has actively communicated what
she agrees with his immigration policy. Except for
that's the major issue. That is exactly the major issue here. Like, one of the things that has made me so angry in the way that the Democratic Party has presented immigration as like they are going to be the border, they're going to be the border party, is so fucking stupid. Not because you're making a concession that like immigrants constitute a national security threat, which is unique in the history of the Democratic Party, at least in contemporary history. This is a unique thing that the Democratic Party has given ground to. Okay. And that makes voters in your own base go, wait, what the fuck? Okay. So I guess we're for the border wall. All right. Well, the other guy has been pro border wall always. And you just now look like a flip flopper. But beyond that, I think that it is a terrible place to it's a terrible way to communicate a winning message, because now you can't even bring up how Donald Trump is an extremist on the fucking border. They are genuinely, I think, fearful that if they bring up Donald Trump's insane anti-immigrant policies as a massive problem, because they saw that one fucking poll that said like 60% want mass deportations, they're now stuck with this idea that like if we tell people that that's going to happen, like that people are going to run in and set up concentration camps once Trump is president, that everyone's going to go, oh, I love that.
Well, first
and they're not even actively communicating how fucking devastating that will look like for the humanity of these supposedly 20 million people that have been living in your fucking neighborhoods, that work at jobs that you don't see, that you take for granted, but then also the economic issues that come along with that as well. Like all of these, a litany of problems, and they're not actively separating themselves and positioning themselves against the Republican Party's policies on the matter by simply saying, oh, they're ineffective. They're not effective enough to be the anti-immigrant, immigrant mutilator party. We will be the immigrant destroyer party.